The Janitor Who Caught a Falling Star. Part 1. The night shift. Cole Ferris had worked the night shift at the Halcyon Tower for 6 years, and in 6 years nothing interesting had ever happened on level 41. The Halcyon was the tallest building in the city's diplomatic quarter, a glass spire reserved for embassies, trade delegations, and 3 months ago, when the news had still felt like a novelty, the first permanent off-world consulate the planet had ever hosted. Cole had read the headlines like everyone else. Alien delegation arrives. First contact formalized. New era begins. He had felt mostly the same thing he felt about any headline, a vague sense that the world was changing somewhere far above his pay grade, and that his job, regardless, was still to mop the floors and empty the bins by 6 a.m. He pushed his cart down the 41st floor corridor a little after 11, humming along to nothing in particular, badge swinging from his belt, mop bucket squeaking on its bad wheel the way it had squeaked for 6 years, despite 3 written requests to maintenance to fix it. The consulate level was usually quiet at this hour. Most of the staff cleared out by 9, the diplomatic security teams running a skeleton rotation overnight, the whole floor humming with the low electric stillness of a place built for people far more important than a janitor with a bad knee and a battered mop bucket. 6 years was long enough to learn a building the way most people never bothered to learn anything, not the parts anyone official cared about, but the small, unglamorous truths nobody else thought to notice. Cole knew which fire doors stuck in humid weather, and which ones swung too freely. He knew the security cameras with dead batteries that nobody had gotten around to replacing, and the ones that recorded over themselves every 72 hours whether anyone reviewed the footage or not. He knew the maintenance access points wedged behind decorative paneling that the building's architects had clearly never expected anyone to actually use. None of it had ever mattered before. It was just the accumulated trivia of a job most people walked past without a second thought, the kind of knowledge that filled the long, quiet hours of an overnight shift and gave a person something to do with their hands and their attention besides watch the clock. He had taken the job originally because it paid better than the warehouse work he'd done in his 20s, and because the overnight hours suited a man who'd never quite settled into anyone else's idea of a normal schedule. His sister Priya liked to joke that he'd chosen the job specifically so he could avoid small talk with anyone important, and there was probably some truth buried in that Cole had never been much for ceremony, never cared much who he was talking to, as long as the conversation was honest. It made him, in retrospect, a strange and entirely accidental match for the kind of night that was about to happen to him. He didn't expect the woman standing alone at the end of the corridor, barefoot, in a long dress the colour of deep water, looking at the wall like it might tell her something useful. "Mom, you're not supposed to be out here without an escort," he said, because that was, technically, his job too. Not security exactly, but the kind of low-level vigilance that came from working somewhere long enough to know who belonged and who didn't. She turned. Her eyes were a shade of violet that didn't occur naturally in anything Cole had ever met, and her skin had a faint luminescence under the corridor lights, like moonlight caught just under the surface. She was, he understood with a small, distant jolt, not human. "I am aware," she said in flawless, faintly formal English. "I needed air the conditioning units do not provide." That's, Cole considered his options, found none of them adequate, and settled for, "That's not really a thing the air conditioning does, ma'am." "I am aware of that as well." She studied him with an expression he couldn't quite place, not haughty, not nervous, something more like cautious curiosity, the look of someone evaluating whether a stranger was worth the energy of further conversation. "You are the maintenance worker." "Janitor. Cole." He held out a hand out of habit, then immediately wondered if that was the wrong move, diplomatically speaking, and let it drop halfway. "Sorry, probably not supposed to introduce myself to whoever you are." "Lyra," she said, "of the Thessanari delegation. Cole had read enough of the headlines to recognize the name vaguely Thessanari, one of the founding worlds of whatever loose coalition of off-world powers had finally decided Earth was worth a formal embassy. He had not, however, connected the dots quickly enough to realize what Princess of the Thessanari delegation actually meant before the first shot came through the window behind her. Part 2. Glass and Silence. The glass didn't shatter the way movies had taught Cole to expect. It crazed first, a spiderweb of fractures blooming outward from a small, precise point, and then it simply gave way all at once, raining down in a glittering curtain that caught the corridor lights like falling stars. Lyra moved before Cole's brain finished processing the sound. She dropped low, instinctive, a motion too practiced to be panic, and Cole, acting on nothing more sophisticated than reflex and 6 years of mopping floors near important people he'd been quietly trained to protect in vague, theoretical ways during onboarding, grabbed the nearest thing within reach, which happened to be his mop bucket, and hauled it sideways as a shield as he threw himself toward her. The second shot took a chunk out of the wall where she'd been standing a half-second earlier. "Move," Cole said, voice cracking with the particular adrenaline of someone who had never once expected to use the words active shooter protocol outside of a mandatory training video. Move now!" Lyra was already moving faster than he expected, low and controlled, years of something training instinct, both evident in the economy of her motion. They reached the stairwell door together, Cole shouldering it open while keeping his body between her and the broken window behind them, and the door slammed shut on a third impact that punched a clean hole through the wall panel they'd just passed. "Who is shooting at you?" Cole demanded, half dragging her down the first flight of stairs. "I do not know," Lyra said, breath tight but controlled. "I did not expect anyone to be shooting at all." "That makes 2 of us." Cole hit the second-floor landing and kept going, mind racing through the limited geography of a building he'd cleaned every night for 6 years and somehow never thought to map for an emergency like this. The main lobby would be covered any assassin competent enough to hit a 41st-floor window from outside would have eyes on the obvious exits. The loading dock on the south side, though, the one he used to wheel out the trash compactor every Tuesday, had a service door that fed into the parking structure. Unmonitored except by a camera, Cole knew for a fact had been broken since March because he'd filed the work order himself. "This way," he said, peeling off towards the service corridor on the ground floor instead of the lobby. "Trust me." "I do not know you," Lyra said, even as she followed him without hesitation, which struck Cole distantly as either remarkably trusting or remarkably desperate. "Fair," he said, "but I know this building better than whoever's shooting at you does, and right now that's the only thing keeping either of us alive." Part 3. The loading dock. The service corridor smelled like bleach and old cardboard, lit by a single flickering fluorescent tube Cole had also filed a work order for, also ignored. He led Lyra past the recycling bins, past the boiler room to the heavy steel door at the end that led out to the loading dock, and stopped dead when he heard footsteps on the stairwell behind them. Fast, deliberate, closing. "They found the stairwell," Lyra said quietly. "Yeah." Cole's heart was hammering hard enough that he could feel it in his throat. He looked at the loading dock door, at the dim parking structure beyond it, at the long open stretch of asphalt between here and anywhere resembling safety, and made a decision with considerably less confidence than the moment required. He'd cleaned this dock 1,000 times, wheeled trash bins across it in the dead of night when the building was empty enough to make him forget, briefly, that he worked somewhere important at all. He knew in the particular way a person knows the unglamorous geography of their own routine, exactly where the cameras pointed, and exactly where they didn't. Exactly which sections of floor grating had been left unsecured since a contractor's repair job went unfinished 8 months earlier. "Okay, new plan," There's a maintenance tunnel under the loading dock, runs under the street, connects to the old subway access point 2 blocks over. Hardly anybody knows it's there. I only know because I had to clear a clog in it 8 months ago. You want to take a princess of the Thessanari court through a sewage tunnel, Lara said, and there was, even now, even with footsteps closing behind them, something almost amused in her voice. I want to take a princess of the Thessanari court somewhere whoever's trying to kill her doesn't know to look, Cole corrected. The sewage part is just a regrettable detail. She looked at him for a half-second, really looked, the way she hadn't quite managed in the corridor upstairs, before the shooting had reduced everything to instinct and motion, and something in her expression shifted, settled, decided. Lead, she said. He led. The access hatch sat under a floor grate near the compactor, stiff with disuse, and it took both of them straining together to wrench it open before the footsteps in the stairwell reached the ground floor door. Cole dropped down first, helped Lyra down after him. Her hand, when it gripped his, was cool and steady despite everything and hauled the grate shut above them just as the service corridor door above banged open. They held still in the dark, breathing as quietly as 2 adrenaline-soaked bodies could manage, listening to footsteps cross the loading dock above, pause, circle, and finally retreat. They didn't find it, Cole whispered, more to convince himself than to inform her. Not yet, Lyra whispered back. We should keep moving. They kept moving. Part 4. Underground. The tunnel ran narrow and low, forcing them both to duck, lit only by the small emergency flashlight clipped permanently to Cole's belt, another 6 years of night shift habit that had never once felt necessary until tonight. Water dripped somewhere ahead, echoing strangely off curved concrete walls, and the air carried the particular damp mineral smell of a space that had not seen daylight in decades. You handle yourself well for a maintenance worker, Lyra said after several minutes of silence, her voice carrying an edge of genuine curiosity now that the immediate danger had receded slightly. Janitor, Cole corrected again, mostly out of stubbornness. And honestly, I don't. I just know this building really well, and panic apparently looks a lot like competence if you move fast enough. On Thessanar, we would call that instinct under pressure. It is considered a valuable trait. Difficult to train. You either possess it or you do not. On Earth, we mostly just call it adrenaline and bad decision-making, Cole said, and was rewarded with something that might have been the ghost of a laugh. The tunnel narrowed further as they went, forcing them both nearly into a crouch, and Cole found himself talking simply to fill the silence, to keep his own nerves from spiraling back into the cold panic that had gripped him in the corridor upstairs. For what it's worth, I've never actually had to use this tunnel for an emergency before, mostly just the clog. Some idiot upstairs flushed about a roll and a half of paper towels down a drain that wasn't built for it, and I got to spend 4 hours down here with a snake auger figuring out where the blockage was. That sounds considerably less dramatic than tonight. Considerably, Cole agreed, though I distinctly remember thinking at the time that it was the worst night of my year. Funny how priorities shift. They walked another stretch in silence, the tunnel sloping gently downward, before Lyra spoke again, quieter this time. I should thank you. Properly. You did not have to come back for me in that corridor. You could have run the other direction the moment the glass broke. Could have, Cole agreed. Didn't occur to me, honestly. You were standing right there. Seemed rude to just leave. Rude? Lyra repeated, like she was testing the strangeness of the word against the size of what he'd actually done. I contain multitudes, Cole said. Mostly bad jokes under pressure, apparently. She studied him in the dim flashlight glow, the rumpled work shirt with his name stitched crooked over the pocket, the badge still clipped to his belt next to the flashlight, the faint sheen of sweat and adrenaline on a face that had clearly not expected to be doing any of this tonight, and something in her expression softened into an emotion Cole couldn't quite name. somewhere between gratitude and genuine surprise. On my world, she said carefully, those assigned to maintain a space are rarely permitted near anyone of consequence. It is considered improper, a separation of duties. She paused. I find I do not understand why. You have done more to keep me alive in the last 20 minutes than my entire security detail managed in 3 months. Yeah, well, Cole said, where I'm from, the guy who knows where all the pipes are tends to know the building better than anyone with a fancier title. Turns out that's useful when someone's shooting at you. Apparently so, Lyra said, and this time the almost laugh became a real one, quiet and surprised, like she hadn't expected to find anything funny tonight and resented faintly that she had. Part 5. Who Wants Her Dead? They emerged 40 minutes later through a rusted access ladder into the basement of an old subway maintenance building, 2 blocks from the Halcyon Tower, abandoned for years, scheduled for demolition, that kept getting delayed by city budget disputes, which made it, as far as Cole knew, exactly nowhere anyone would think to look. Lyra sat on an overturned crate, catching her breath properly for the first time since the window had shattered, and Cole paced the small concrete room, trying to think past the adrenaline crash settling cold and shaky into his hands. Okay, he said. We need a plan that's better than hide in a condemned building until I run out of granola bars in my locker. You keep granola bars in your locker. 3. Don't judge me, it's been a long shift. He crouched in front of her, voice dropping into something steadier, more serious. Who wants you dead, Lyra? And don't tell me you don't know, because nobody puts 3 rounds through diplomatic glass on a random Tuesday. Lyra was quiet for a moment, weighing something. There are factions within my own court who did not want the Earth Treaty signed, she said finally. My mother, the Queen, believes Earth's alliance secures resources our homeworld desperately needs. Others believe the alliance dilutes Thessanari authority, that we should not bind ourselves to a species so new to the wider galaxy. She looked at her hands. I was sent here as a gesture of goodwill, a symbol of trust between our peoples. If I die on Earth's soil during the first month of the treaty, the alliance collapses before it has properly begun. The blame falls on Earth's security failures. The faction that opposed the treaty gets exactly what it wanted, with clean hands. So somebody back home wants you dead to sabotage the treaty, Cole said slowly, and wants it to look like Earth's fault. That is my assessment, yes. Great. Cole rubbed a hand over his face. And the people who shot at you tonight local, or did they come from your side? I do not know. Either is possible. My security detail at the consulate are vetted by my own court, which means if the threat originates there, it could already be inside the building I was meant to be protected in. She met his eyes. Which is, I suspect, why whoever planned this knew exactly which window to target and exactly when I would be standing near it. Cole sat back on his heels, processing that. So we can't go back to the consulate. Can't trust your own security, can't exactly call the local police without knowing if this is an inside job on your end too. No, Lyra agreed quietly. We cannot. Then I guess it's just us for a while, Cole said, and tried to sound more confident about that than he felt. Part 5.5. Names in the dark. Tell me about the factions, Cole said after a long stretch of silence had settled between them, his mind still snagging on the puzzle of who, exactly, wanted a princess dead badly enough to put 3 rounds through diplomatic glass. You said your mother believes in the treaty. Who doesn't? Lyra was quiet for a moment, choosing her words with the particular care of someone who had spent her whole life being taught that words spoken in the wrong company carried consequences. There is a faction within the High Court, led by Lord Vash Kalanor, my mother's chief military advisor, and, until recently, someone I considered something close to family. He has argued for over a decade that Thessanar's strength lies in self-reliance, that binding ourselves to younger species dilutes resources and attention that should remain focused on threats closer to home. She paused. He voted against the Earth Treaty in open council. He lost that vote. I did not think until tonight that he would attempt to overturn it through means this direct. You think it's him? I think it is possible. I do not know it is certain. She looked down at her hands. That is perhaps the worst part of tonight, not simply that someone wishes me dead, but that I cannot say with confidence who among the people I have known my entire life it might be. Cole considered that for a moment, turning it over against the rooftop chase, the black sedan, the professional, patient way their pursuers had searched the alley below. Whoever's doing this has resources, local resources, that sedan, the weapons that's not something you improvise in a city you've never operated in before. Either your faction back home has people already embedded here, or they have local help. Lyra finished, something cold entering her voice. Someone on Earth willing to assist in killing a foreign diplomat, for reasons of their own. Which means this isn't just your problem, Cole said slowly. If there's someone on this side helping plan an assassination meant to collapse the treaty, that's an Earth problem too. Somebody here wants this alliance dead just as badly as your guy back home does. Lyra met his eyes, and for the first time since the window had shattered behind her, something like genuine fear flickered openly across her face, not for herself, Cole realized, but for the scale of what they'd stumbled into. If that is true, she said quietly, then neither of our worlds is as united behind this treaty as either of our governments has claimed. And we do not know, tonight, who on either side can actually be trusted. Then I guess we don't trust anybody, Cole said, until we figure out who's left. She held his gaze a moment longer, something settling between them that hadn't been there before, not just the trust of two people surviving a crisis together, but the weight of a shared, unwanted understanding that the danger reached further and deeper than either of them had wanted to believe. Not anybody, she said softly, almost anybody. The distinction, small as it was, sat warm and unfamiliar in Cole's chest for the rest of the night. Part 6. A strange kind of trust. They stayed in the old maintenance building through the rest of the night, Cole keeping watch near the boarded window while Lyra rested, neither of them sleeping much. Somewhere around 3 a.m, she came and sat beside him instead, close enough that her shoulder nearly brushed his. "Tell me about your life," she said. "The one before tonight." "Not much to tell. Wake up around 4 p.m, work the night shift, sleep through most of the day. Mop floors, fix the occasional jammed door, get yelled at by building management about budget cuts I have no control over." He shrugged. "Not exactly the stuff of legend." "It sounds peaceful." "It was boring," Cole said. "I used to think that was the problem with it. And now I think boring's underrated." He glanced at her sideways. "What about you? What's a Thessanari princess actually do when nobody's shooting at her?" Lyra considered the question with the same careful weight she seemed to give everything: diplomacy, ceremony, a great deal of standing very still while important people discuss things on my behalf. A faint wry note entered her voice. "It is, in its own way, also rather boring, though I have never had the option of calling it that aloud." "You can call it that now. I won't tell anyone," Cole offered a small, tired smile. "Mostly because I don't think either of us is going anywhere anyone could overhear us for a while." Something shifted in the quiet between them. Not dramatic, not sudden. Just the particular ease that grows between two people who have survived something together and found, somewhat to their own surprise, that they didn't mind each other's company once the adrenaline settled. Lyra studied him in the dim light, violet eyes thoughtful. "You are not at all what I expected from this world," she said. "Most people aren't," Cole said. "Earth's mostly full of regular people doing regular jobs, hoping nothing too dramatic happens before their shift ends." And yet, here you are. Here I am, he agreed, and found looking at her in the half-dark of a condemned subway building that he did not particularly regret it. Part 7. The Second Attempt. They moved again at dawn, working their way through back streets toward a contact. Cole trusted his sister Priya, a paramedic who worked overnight shifts at a clinic 2 miles from the Halcyon, and who had, over the years, demonstrated a reliable willingness to ask very few questions when Cole showed up needing help. They never made it. The black sedan pulled alongside them on a quiet residential street just after sunrise, moving too smoothly, too deliberately, for Cole's nerves not to spike instantly. He grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her into the narrow gap between 2 buildings, half a second before the sedan's window dropped and something that was unmistakably a weapon sleek dark, unlike anything Cole had ever seen outside of the headlines about off-world technology, tracked toward where they'd been standing. "Run," Cole said, and they ran. The alley spat them out onto a parallel street, narrow and lined with delivery trucks idling for the morning's first rounds, and for a few precious seconds the chaos of an ordinary city waking up worked in their favor, drivers shouting at each other over a blocked loading zone, a delivery cart rattling across uneven pavement. Enough ordinary noise and motion to swallow 2 people running flat out, without immediately drawing every eye on the block. It didn't last. A second figure emerged from the sedan's far side, cutting across the street, at an angle clearly meant to flank them, and Cole understood, with the cold clarity of someone whose body had decided panic wasn't useful anymore, that they were being herded rather than simply chased, pushed deliberately toward whatever dead end their pursuers had already scouted. "They're trying to box us in," he said, breathless, scanning the street ahead for anything that wasn't the obvious, predictable path. "We need to break the pattern." "How?" "By doing something stupid enough they didn't plan for it." Cole grabbed her hand and cut hard left, vaulting a low loading dock railing instead of continuing down the street, dragging Lyra over it after him into a service yard stacked with shipping pallets and empty crates. It cost them precious seconds, but it also cost their pursuers a clean line of sight, and Cole used the brief cover to half-drag, half-guide Lyra between 2 stacked rows of pallets towards the fire escape ladder he'd clocked the moment they entered the yard. A shot cracked off the brick wall behind them, close enough that fragments stung Cole's cheek, and then they were climbing. Fast, adrenaline burning through exhaustion neither of them had fully recovered from since the night before. They reached the rooftop just as the sedan screeched to a stop on the street below. Cole pulled them both flat behind the low parapet wall, chest heaving, listening to car doors open and close, footsteps fanning out to search the alley they'd vanished from. "They're persistent," Lyra breathed. "Yeah, no kidding." Cole risked a glance over the parapet, watching 2 figures in dark tactical gear move methodically through the alley below, professional, unhurried, the kind of search pattern that suggested they had time and resources Cole and Lyra did not. "We need somewhere they really can't find us, somewhere that's not on any map they'd think to check." Lyra was quiet for a moment, then said, with the particular careful tone of someone admitting something reluctantly, "There may be a way to reach the Thessanari trade envoy stationed outside the capital, a separate faction from my mother's court, neutral in the succession disputes. If I can reach them, they would have the authority and the resources to protect me properly, beyond whatever has been compromised at the consulate." "Okay, where?" "An old freight terminal on the city's eastern edge. The envoy uses it for discreet supply transport. It is..." She hesitated. "It is several miles from here, and I do not know if it is currently safe to assume the route is clear." Cole looked at the rooftop around them, at the city spread out grey and indifferent in the early light, at the woman beside him who had, 12 hours ago, been a stranger standing alone in a hallway he mopped 5 nights a week. "Then I guess we're walking," he said, carefully. Part 8. What the night taught them. They moved through the city for the better part of the day, threading back alleys and construction sites and the kind of overlooked urban infrastructure only someone who'd spent 6 years thinking about a building's bones could navigate with any confidence. Twice they spotted searchers, once a pair on foot near a transit station, once the same black sedans circling a few blocks from where they'd taken shelter in an empty parking garage, and twice Cole's stubborn, half-improvised knowledge of the city's unglamorous undersides kept them a half step ahead. By midday, hunger had become its own quiet problem. Cole's 3 granola bars, divided carefully, lasted them through a tense hour, hiding behind a dumpster while a city maintenance crew worked obliviously nearby, close enough that Cole could have called out for help and didn't, uncertain whether doing so would bring rescue or simply alert the wrong people to exactly where they were. Lyra ate her share without complaint, though Cole noticed, with a small pang of guilt he hadn't expected, that she gave him the larger half each time without being asked, the kind of automatic generosity that seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised him. "You don't have to do that," he said, the second time it happened. "Do what? Give me more than you take. You've had a worse day than I have, technically. People are trying to kill you specifically." "They are trying to kill us both, at this point, given how thoroughly you have involved yourself," Lyra pointed out, not unkindly. "And I find I would rather go hungry than watch you do so on my account after everything you've already risked." She studied him for a moment. "Is that not how it works among your people, sharing what little there is when it matters?" "Yeah," Cole admitted. "Guess I'm just not used to being on the receiving end of it from someone like you." "Someone like me," Lyra repeated, something almost teasing in her exhaustion. "A princess, you mean?" "A princess who could probably have me arrested for half the things I've said to you today." "I find myself disinclined to do so," she said, "given the circumstances." And the small, tired smile that followed it stayed with Cole longer than he expected, somewhere in the back of his mind, through the rest of the long afternoon's careful, anxious movement across the city. Somewhere in the long stretch of afternoon, hiding in the shadowed loading bay of a shuttered warehouse, exhaustion finally outpaced adrenaline, and they sat together in silence that no longer needed filling. "I keep thinking," Lyra said eventually, "about how strange this is. A day ago I did not know you existed. Now I cannot imagine surviving today without you." "Funny how that works," Cole said. "Yesterday I thought my biggest problem was the bad wheel on my mop bucket. I am sorry your bucket has been so thoroughly abandoned." "It's fine. It'll still be squeaking when I get back." He glanced at her. "If I get back." "You will," Lyra said with more certainty than the day had really earned. "I intend to make certain of it." Something in the quiet after that felt heavier than the words themselves. An acknowledgement, unspoken but mutual, that whatever this was between them, born out of broken glass and underground tunnels and a long, dangerous day spent trusting a stranger with everything, had become something neither of them was prepared to simply walk away from once the danger passed. Cole reached over carefully, and Lyra let him take her hand, her fingers cool and steady around his in a way that had stopped somewhere over the last several hours, feeling like the grip of two people surviving a crisis together, and started feeling like something else entirely. "For what it's worth," Cole said quietly, "I'm glad I was on shift last night." "As am I," Lyra said, and meant it more than the simple words let on. The quiet stretched between them for a while after that, comfortable in a way neither of them examined too closely. Eventually Lyra spoke again, her voice softer, more curious than careful this time. "You never finished telling me about your life. Before tonight. You mentioned the work, but not the rest of it." Cole shrugged, feeling oddly exposed by the question, though there wasn't much to hide. Not a lot of rest to tell. Parents passed a few years back, close together heart trouble, the kind that runs in families and nobody talks about until it's too late. It's just me and Priya now. She went the useful route. Paramedic. Saves actual lives for a living. I mop floors and fix doors. We make fun of each other about it constantly. You said she would help us, that you trusted her. With my life, Cole said simply. She's the only family I've got left, and the only person I know who'd open her door at 6 a.m. to a brother covered in soot and a woman who isn't, strictly speaking, from this planet, and just start asking practical questions instead of panicking. He smiled faintly. She'd probably have field-dressed both of us by now and started lecturing me about better life choices. She sounds remarkable. She is. Annoyingly so. Cole glanced at Lyra. What about you? Family, besides your mother. A younger brother, Tamis. He has no interest in court politics and has made that fact known to anyone who will listen, which I have always privately admired, though I would never tell him so. A small, fond note entered her voice. He wanted, when we were children, to study the stars rather than govern beneath them. I used to envy that freedom before I understood how rarely it is actually granted. Sounds like you two would get along with my sister. I suspect we would. Lyra was quiet for a moment, something wistful crossing her face. I have not spoken to him in some time. Court obligations rarely allow for it. I find tonight that I regret that more than I expected to. Things go sideways, you start noticing what you've been putting off, Cole said. Happens to everybody, I think. Just usually with smaller stakes than international assassination plots. That earned a real laugh this time, tired but genuine, and something in the easy quiet that followed it felt, to Cole, like the first solid ground either of them had stood on all day. Part 9, the freight terminal. They reached the eastern freight terminal as the sun dropped low and orange over the city skyline, exhausted, filthy, running on nothing but stubbornness and the dwindling adrenaline of a day that had asked too much of both of them. The terminal sat quiet behind a chain-link fence, a scatter of shipping containers and idle freight trucks under sodium floodlights just beginning to flicker on for the evening. They paused at the fence line, scanning the lot for any sign that their pursuers had somehow anticipated this destination too. Nothing moved except the slow, indifferent traffic of a working freight yard winding down for the day, a forklift idling near a loading bay, a pair of dock workers sharing a smoke break by a parked truck. Nothing that suggested anyone was watching for two exhausted fugitives to appear out of the evening light. It looks clear, Cole said, though he didn't entirely trust his own judgment at this point, running as it was on fumes and roughly 18 hours without real sleep. It does, Lyra agreed, though I would not have expected to recognize danger easily today, even if it was standing in plain sight. Fair point. Cole found a gap in the fence line where the chain link had rusted loose from its post, just wide enough to squeeze through. Come on, through here. There, Lyra said, pointing toward a nondescript grey container near the rear of the lot, marked with a small, easily overlooked symbol Cole wouldn't have recognized as Thessanari script if she hadn't pointed it out. That should be the envoy's secure transport. They crossed the lot carefully, staying low between containers, and Lyra rapped a specific pattern against the container's side door. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then the door slid open, and a tall Thessanari figure in plain travelling clothes stood silhouetted against the dim interior light, eyes widening at the sight of the princess standing battered and exhausted in front of him. "Your Highness," the figure said, immediately dropping into a formal bow, "we received no word you were—" "There was no time to send word," Lyra said. "My consulate has been compromised. I require the envoy's protection and a secure channel to my mother that does not pass through the consulate's existing security apparatus." She glanced back at Cole, something fierce and grateful in her expression. "And I require it understood immediately that this man saved my life today, repeatedly, at considerable risk to his own, and is to be treated as an honoured guest of the Thessanari court for as long as he requires." The envoy's eyes moved to Cole, rumpled, soot-streaked, badge still absurdly clipped to his belt, and something in his expression shifted from confusion to a kind of startled respect. "Of course, Your Highness," he said. "Please, both of you, inside quickly." Part 10. An ending that isn't. The container's interior was larger than it looked from outside, fitted out with the quiet efficiency of off-world technology Cole still hadn't fully adjusted to soft, ambient light. A low hum of equipment he couldn't begin to identify, a secure comm terminal the envoy moved to immediately, opening a channel that crackled briefly before settling into a clear connection. Lyra sat across from Cole on a low bench, finally allowing herself to look as tired as she clearly was, and for a moment neither of them spoke, simply absorbing the strange fact of having survived a day that had tried, repeatedly and with considerable resources, to ensure they did not. "What happens now?" Cole asked quietly. "Now I speak with my mother, through a channel I can trust," Lyra said. "Now an investigation begins into who within my own court arranged this and why. Now," she paused, something more uncertain entering her voice for the first time all day. "Now I do not entirely know. The treaty is fragile. Today's attack will not be the last attempt, whether it succeeds in killing me or simply in destabilizing what my mother has tried to build between our worlds. I suspect I will need to remain on Earth, under far heavier protection than before, for the foreseeable future." "That sounds like a reason to stick around, not leave," Cole said. "It is," Lyra agreed, meeting his eyes. "Though I imagine my mother's security advisors will have considerable opinions about exactly how much access a Halcyon Tower janitor should have to a protected diplomatic asset going forward. I prefer maintenance specialist for the record. I will be sure to specify that in my report." A faint, exhausted smile crossed her face, the first real one since the rooftop. The envoy returned from the comm terminal a few minutes later, his expression carefully neutral, in the way Cole was beginning to recognize as a particular Thessanari talent for diplomatic restraint. "Your Highness, the Queen has been informed. She has ordered an immediate inquiry into the consulate's security staff, beginning with anyone who had access to the 41st floor's window schedules. She has also—" He hesitated, glancing briefly at Cole before continuing. "Requested confirmation of the identity of the Earth citizen who assisted you, for the official record." "His name is Cole Ferris," Lyra said, before Cole could decide how he felt about being formally logged into an alien court's official record. "And he is to be commended, not investigated. I will make that clear to my mother myself." "Of course, Your Highness." The envoy's eyes lingered on Cole a moment longer than strictly necessary, something unreadable in his expression, not quite suspicion, not quite respect, but the particular wariness of someone recalculating an unexpected variable. "There is one further matter. The Queen wishes to know whether you recognized either of your attackers, or any detail that might assist the inquiry." Lyra was quiet for a moment. No clear faces, but the weapon used in the first attempt was a modified Vescaran rail-charge court issue, not commercially available, not something easily acquired outside official Thessanari channels. She glanced at Cole. "Which means whoever planned this had access to equipment that should not exist outside my own court's armory." The envoy's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I will relay that to Her Majesty immediately. It narrows the inquiry considerably, and not in a direction anyone will find comfortable." He withdrew to the far end of the container to continue the transmission, leaving Cole and Lyra alone again in the soft ambient light, the weight of that last detail settling heavily between them, an answer that solved nothing, and instead opened a darker, more specific question neither of them had wanted confirmed: that the conspiracy reached close enough to the throne to draw on the court's own restricted armory, which meant whoever was responsible sat near enough to power that exposing them might prove far more dangerous than simply surviving the attempt itself. "That's not good," Cole said quietly. "No," Lyra agreed. It is not. What happens now for us? Cole asked, quieter this time. Lyra reached over, taking his hand again, steadier now than it had been all day. I do not know for certain, but I find I am no longer willing to simply let today be the end of whatever this has become. Yeah, Cole said, something warm and unfamiliar settling in his chest despite the exhaustion, despite the very real, very unresolved danger still hanging over both their heads. Me neither. The comm terminal crackled to life behind them, the envoy's voice murmuring low and urgent into it, relaying word of the day's events to a queen who had sent her daughter to Earth as a gesture of peace and very nearly received her back in a body bag instead. Outside the container, the freight yard's floodlights buzzed against the gathering dark, and somewhere across the city whoever had ordered tonight's attack was almost certainly already planning the next one. Cole didn't know what tomorrow held, whether Lyra's mother would order her home immediately, whether the conspiracy inside the Thessanari court reached deeper than either of them yet understood, whether the black sedan and its occupants had already given up the search or were simply regrouping somewhere nearby, patient and well-resourced and far from finished. He didn't know whether he'd ever set foot in the Halcyon Tower again, or what it would mean for either of them if he did. He only knew that the woman sitting across from him, exhausted and dishevelled and somehow still every bit as composed as she'd been the moment the window shattered behind her, was looking at him like the day's danger hadn't been the only thing that had changed everything. For what it's worth, he said, I'm not going anywhere either. Whatever comes next. Lyra's hand tightened around his, and outside, the night settled in over a city that had no idea how close it had come to war, or how much, in one quiet hallway on the 41st floor, a single unremarkable Tuesday shift had managed to change. The envoy returned once more before the night was through, this time with news that did little to settle the uneasy quiet of the container. The inquiry into the consulate's security staff had already turned up a discrepancy, a maintenance request filed 3 days prior, authorizing access to the 41st floor's window seal mechanisms, signed off by a name no one currently on duty could account for. Lord Calinor's office had not yet responded to the Queen's formal summons, and a second smaller detail had surfaced almost as an afterthought, one the envoy delivered with visible reluctance. Lyra's brother Tamis had left the homeworld 11 days earlier on an unscheduled survey expedition, his exact location currently unconfirmed, his last transmission untraceable beyond a relay point 2 systems away. 11 days, Lyra repeated slowly, something tightening behind her eyes that had nothing to do with exhaustion. Before any of this began. Could be a coincidence, Cole offered, though even as he said it the word felt thin against the shape of everything else that had happened today. On most days I would agree with you, Lyra said. Tonight I find I no longer believe in convenient coincidences. Neither of them said the rest of it aloud, that a missing brother, a forged maintenance request, a restricted court weapon, and a Queen's most trusted advisor who had not yet answered a summons all pointed towards something far larger and far less finished than a single failed assassination attempt in a city neither of their families had ever expected to matter this much. The envoy withdrew again to continue the inquiry, and the container fell quiet except for the distant hum of the freight yard settling into night, and Cole found himself watching Lyra watch the door, some new and unspoken weight visible now beneath the exhaustion she'd worn since the rooftop. You're thinking about your brother, he said. I am thinking, Lyra said carefully, that whatever began tonight did not begin tonight at all. That we have only just discovered the first loose thread of something considerably larger, and that pulling on it may unravel a great deal more than either of us is prepared for. She looked at him. I am also thinking that I do not wish to face whatever comes next without you beside me, which is, I will admit, A rather inconvenient realization to have on a night already full of inconvenient realizations. Yeah, Cole said quietly. Tell me about it. The comm crackled again. Somewhere far above the freight yard, a satellite relay carried Lyra's voice up toward a homeworld she hadn't spoken to honestly in months, and somewhere beneath the question of who had tried to kill her tonight sat a second, quieter question neither of them had answered yet. Not about conspiracies or treaties or the fragile peace between two worlds, but about what exactly they intended to do about each other now that survival was no longer the only thing standing between them. Neither of them had an answer. Not yet. Nor did they have an answer for where Tamis had gone, or why, or whether his absence was connected to the rail charge that had nearly ended Lyra's life on the 41st floor. They did not know whether Lord Callanor would answer the Queen's summons honestly or at all, or whether the local accomplice who had supplied the black sedan and its crew would be found before they struck again. They did not know what it would mean politically, personally, for a relationship that had begun in broken glass and ended, for tonight at least, in a shipping container on the edge of the city, for a Thessanari princess to choose, openly, to keep an Earth Janitor close at hand. What they knew, sitting together in the soft hum of the envoy's quarters, as the floodlights buzzed outside and the night wore on toward an uncertain dawn, was simpler than all of that and somehow more durable. They had survived a day that was never meant to let them, and whatever came next, the inquiry, the missing brother, the silent advisor, the city's own unnamed conspirator, still out there somewhere in the dark, they intended to face it together. The rest would have to wait for morning. But for the first time all day, neither of them looked particularly eager to find one quickly.